You have to have a belief that is almost beyond you and your business to keep marching into what appears to so many others to be certain death and destruction and bankruptcy for what you are doing.
Ben Narasin
is one of the most successful investors in the world. He built his own startup
to a successful IPO
and now invests in unicorn startups.
You have to always you have to set your mindset to how do I find an opportunity to do even more?
What do you look for when you're deciding to invest?
I look for superstar founders. I'd say I need 5 things to make an investment.
Welcome back to Decoded. My name's Alfie Whattam, and this is the show where I speak to experts about what it takes to build great teams and companies. Make sure that you click the follow or subscribe button for more great content like this, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. So, Ben, you've invested in Zenefits, which is valued in the billions, Dropcam, which was acquired by Google, and so many other exciting companies. What do you look for when you're deciding to invest in a startup?
Fair enough. So just to be clear, I did invest in Zenefits, which at peak was worth about $5.5 billion. Now it's not worth anything. It got acquired for a very modest sum. But the founder, Parker Conrad, started a second company called Rippling, which I also invested in, which is now worth about $16 billion. So Parker's been an absolute superstar. I look for superstar founders. I'd say I need 5 things to make an investment. People, great idea, huge market. Because I've not succeeded at investing in brilliant people with bad ideas. I don't love pivots. Some people do all right with pivots. I do not. And you need big markets to make big businesses. So having said that, the most important thing of all is the founder. I mean, I named my fund Tenacity for a reason. There's a lot of brilliant people with decent ideas that just don't have the drive and ambition and grit to make it through the incredibly difficult times, because being a founder is an incredibly difficult journey.
Let's take somebody like Parker. Very few people are able to build something massively successful, and he was obviously able to do it twice. Obviously, a very similar industry, both businesses. What do you think made him who he is? You know, what separates successful founders from those that don't quite make it?
I think it varies a bit, but you know, I sometimes have metaphors for founders I back, and to me, Parker was my Larry Ellison. You know, the stories, I've never met Larry Ellison. The stories are that he was rejected early in life by a young woman he was in love with because he was from the wrong side of the tracks, and was ever driven to prove to the world that he would be the ultimate success. Parker was actually fired from the business he was in before he started Zenefits, and then sadly was also fired from Zenefits. The chip on his shoulder to prove his ability, his worth, I've never seen anything like it in terms of the drive and ambition and just absolute need to get to a certain place. And I think that's critical for any founder, not necessarily you have a chip on your shoulder, but the way I would put it is you need to understand the difference between what you need and what you want. What you need is what will drive you until you achieve it. It's like a runner. My daughter was a world-class, high school runner, undefeated for a long time in our community. But no matter how hard she ran and how fast she ran, when she crossed that finish line, she was done. That's the need. When you cross the finish line, you've hit your need, you're done. The want is totally separate. Want is mushy and not going to be the thing. If your want is long past the finish line, it's unlikely you're going to keep running to get there. So I think for some people, it's just never going to be big enough. Now, sometimes that's because they want to change the world in a certain way or create a certain type of good or a certain type of reality. In other cases, it's, just proving themselves to be truly exceptional founders. And sometimes there is no level at which there stops being a next level up. Now, I will say that same drive and ambition can be somewhat destructive to a person personally when they are never able to, when it's never good enough. That can create all kinds of life challenges. But I think in general, super ambitious and driven founders will fight really hard to get to a certain place and then can find more peace. Some people call it work-life balance. There is no work-life balance for a founder. The only time you get work-life balance is after liquidity.
Yep, very true. The Parker story that you mentioned, getting ousted, and the whole David Sachs situation is crazy and probably a topic for another day. Yes, but that example of a need versus a want, a must have, a burning desire rather than just a nice to have, and it'll be amazing if that happened, but it's not a deal breaker. Do you think that can be taught, or do you think you have to be born with a certain element of I need this to happen, or I physically can't survive?
Yeah, no, it can't be taught. You're either born with it or it grows in you as your life evolves. As I mentioned, Parker was fired even before he started Zenefits. I think that created a certain need. Now, look, he was almost certainly incredibly, I didn't know him before that. One of his investors that I knew him way back when he was younger. I assume he was very intelligent, very smart, very driven. But I don't think you build that in. I don't think you go out and decide to learn it. There's a saying, I do CrossFit and I steal a lot of sayings from my coach. And one of them is, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
Like today, there's a guy who came late. He tried not to do, when you're late to CrossFit, you have to do 20 burpees. He tried not to. He tried just to slide into the warm up. And then during the break, when we're supposed to either get a glass of water, use the bathroom, if we have to, he's on his phone, which is an absolute strict no. And I'm like, yeah, this guy, I hope this guy doesn't work with any of my founders, because he's just always sort of, there's one where there's a picture of somebody running, doing sprints, and their foot is just before the line versus just after, cheating yourself out of that extra inch, just not working that hard. I think that's mainly, it's either nature or nurture, because you could also get it from your family. My father had a particularly strong work ethic, so that's how I identified with what, I love my father, he's the male figure in my life, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure that impacted me early on. If your father is a slovenly sloth that doesn't work at all, maybe that's what you view as the right way for your life to be lived.
Yeah.
So I think it's mainly nature and then a material amount of nurture to go with it. It's probably going to have to be both.
I completely agree with everything you're saying around the work-life balance aspect, that you need to be all in, you need to be obsessed, you need to want this more than anything. And then after you've achieved the outcome, if you want to relax, you are welcome to do so, obviously. Most people with that mindset, they struggle to do that, because what got them to that point, it's not as if you can turn a switch and suddenly,
It's also incredibly boring. Like, I retired for 6 years. That didn't work out at all. I can never retire again, I don't think. So, it does take, you can't turn that off either. It's not like you train yourself and just have an 18-hour-a-day mindset and then one day decide that 6 is good or 2. The only way I think you can retire successfully in life is if you really, really love golf, because that's the only thing I'm aware of that can absorb the kind of time that a traditional commitment to work would. And that's assuming you're willing to play 36 holes a day, which I am not. I'm not even willing to play 18. So, I'm sure there's other hobbies that have deep, deep time commitments, but I don't know many of them. I mean, you're not going to build little wooden boats for, 12 hours a day. Travel gets boring eventually. And, you volunteer. Certainly you try to do better in the world, but unless you're going to create a foundation and make that a full-time effort, it's just very hard to turn off that switch. If you've got that sort of what people used to call alpha mindset, you don't just go like, I'm tired of being an alpha, I think I'll go beta. It's just not how it works. One of the things you can learn pretty quickly, though, if you do end up retiring, is that there's a point in time where so I was married, I'm married, I've been married for over 30 years. And there's a point in time when my friends that have retired realize that there's a conversation that happens with your significant other, which is something like, hey, I married you for better or for worse, not for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you find something else to do? Because if you've been burning it up, nonstop all day, every day, and your wife is working, then she's doing that. Or if she's not, like, bottom line is you're not in her face messing with her. And COVID was disastrous for relationships, because people that only had to spend a little bit of time together every day all of a sudden had to spend 24/7. Takes a strong relationship to get past that. So sometimes people, not infrequently, that do very well financially will go start a second business, not because it's something they absolutely have to do, but they need a reason to leave the house. And then they choose the best available idea, and that usually doesn't work out, because the best available idea isn't the idea worth starting, and then they just use up all their own money, and it ends up being something they shut down and write off. Also, I think every entrepreneur that succeeds once wants to prove they were good, not just lucky. But luck is required. Luck is timing. Luck is so many things. And if you don't have it, it's almost impossible. And the harder you work, the luckier you get, so you can influence it. But you can't, if you were in an industry think about like the crypto space right now.
Yeah.
Don't invest in crypto, but certainly the people that stuck it out for the long, long time now have a totally different set of opportunities than they did before. Yeah. And that's a space where they've seen wow and uh-oh and wow and uh-oh. And so, being in at the right time or surviving until the right time are critical to being able to grow.
This is a quick message to tell you about my company, Alpha AI. We built Lisa, the world's first AI-powered recruiter who screens candidates for you on autopilot. You can make your recruitment process 10 times faster, 90% lower cost, and significantly improve the candidate experience, all with our AI agent for hiring. Learn more at welovealpha.com or click the link below in the description. And now, back to the episode. It's a great example. The Genius Act was just passed today, and that's going to have a huge positive impact on a lot of crypto startups, I believe. So, but 5 years ago, he wasn't saying that. So, yeah, very, very true.
I mean, 5 years ago, I think Bitcoin hit an all-time low. Well, not an all-time low, but I do remember when it dipped below 20.
Yeah, that's when I bought it. Yeah,
and now it's 120. I mean, I hope we held on. So,
yeah,
timing and patience are important.
A lot of the things that you say there around tenacity, around work ethic, around timing, around patience, around luck, I'm fully on board with, and I think most investors would also be, and rightfully so. There are patterns that we have to spot and match in this game. What about unpopular opinions? Is there anything specific within venture, within investing that you believe, which perhaps your peers don't, which kind of is an unpopular opinion per se, which you hold when it comes to what it takes to make a great company?
Well, I don't think it's an unpopular opinion that tenacity matters. All entrepreneurs that I've ever met that comment on the name are enormously positive. VCs are sort of less effusive. And I think that's because a lot of VCs were never actually entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so they don't understand how critical to survival tenacity is. I mean, they've seen it through the window of being on a board, but they haven't lived it. And so it's just interesting to see that. So I think I might believe it at another level. I tend to be very entrepreneur-centric. There are still people that are very comfortable replacing founders as CEOs. That's not in my ball game. I've had to do it twice, not because I chose to, but because I was either working at a firm or a firm had control of the board and it, insisted it be done. But I've been pretty violently opposed in both of those instances and even fought after the fact. So I don't think CEOs are exchangeable. I think that's a thermonuclear option you want to avoid at all costs. You want founder CEOs that can go all the way, and if they make some mistakes, they just should be coached and helped and allowed to, grow better. I guess I'm not particularly obsessive about where you went to school. Some VCs care a lot that you went to not a lot of VCs. It's not as bad as sort of the stereotype, but yes, I need brilliant people. But I would rather have, the number one in their class out of, Istanbul Tech, which I don't even know if exists, than bottom quartile out of Stanford. It's not just about where you went to school. It's about how did you do? And also, maybe there were things that happened there that show me that you have, determining whether somebody has the tenacity and drive that I need is extremely difficult. There's no test. There's no series of 12 questions. It's just a long time spent with the entrepreneur to try to learn more and more about them until you find something that gives you an indication one way or the other. I don't believe you can use AI and data to find the best deals at the earliest stages. Now, I think there are two axes in investing. There's art and there's science. The earlier you are investing, the more art, and the later you invest, the more science. If you are trying to use in-depth analysis of data and spreadsheets and Excel to figure out a seed round, you do not understand what you're doing for a living. And if you're trying to use your gut to figure out whether you should do a Series D, you also don't understand the realities of this business. You need some science in early, and you need some gut and art in late. But net, at seed and even pre-seed, even more so, you're betting on people and an idea that's probably just a bunch of PowerPoint slides. I have seen folks try to apply later stage investing methodologies to seed. It's a disaster. And I do believe one person's opinion is enough. My favorite story about this, I'm a spirits drinker on occasion. I do a lot of parties, and it's easier to do parties with spirits because they last years after you open them versus, wine, which lasts days. So single malts or bourbon. And the largest producer of bourbon in the United States, I believe, is a company called Brown-Forman. And they have various brands of bourbon. They have a tasting panel, I believe, of 14 people. And one of their products sells for $15 in a plastic bottle. I think their best product probably doesn't sell for more than $100. Pappy Van Winkle is considered the best bourbon in the world. Sells for between $2,700 and $5,500 a bottle if you can get it. And it has a tasting panel too. One guy, his name is actually Pappy. And his attitude is, if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for my clients. One person's view is enough if that person knows what they're doing and is experienced and expert in that category. And if they have learned to trust their gut when their gut is telling them things for the right reason. Although none of us get so, I've been doing this for 18 years. It's not like I'm like, this is the one.
Yeah.
I have to say, wow, the first time I meet somebody and hear their idea, but it's going to take me 1 to 3 months to figure out whether the decision is that I should invest in the company or not. But if I don't say, wow, there's no second meeting. You can't take 10,000 meetings in 2 years and have a lot of second meetings where you're not going to go forward with them, which is what we did over 23 and 24.
I mean, Henry Ford said you can have any color car you like as long as it's black. Yeah, the famous quote. And it's so true, isn't it? Like, there are certain people with beliefs on how the world should be, and the world will form and mold around those individuals rather than the reverse. When you have too many chefs in the kitchen, each with various ways of doing things, then you get a camel when you don't get a horse.
It's not that different than the fact that the best companies in the world are all founder-led. I think every $1 trillion business that exists on the planet, if you take out Saudi Aramco, which I don't give credit to, they didn't build a business, they drilled a hole in the ground and found oil. Okay, not the same. Everything else, founder-led. Whether it's Google, Facebook, NVIDIA, right? All these companies, these are still led or were led by the founder. That singular vision, that focus, that drive, that North Star that they're navigating towards, these things are required. I mean, I think you can, going back to your question of born or learned, there's a famous quote. I brought one of my entrepreneur I was considering funding in to see somebody. And when he pitched me, he did a good job, but he was all over the place in the pitch when I brought him into this tier 1 firm. And at the end of the pitch, the partner said, the 3 most important things in being an entrepreneur? I said, no, I don't. Focus, focus, focus. And it's pretty clear this guy didn't have any. You can train yourself for things like that. You can train yourself for traits. One of my favorite quotes, I don't know who said it, but if you do not have a trait that you need, assume it of yourself. I'll give you a real world example. There was a company you might know because you're in the UK called Boo.com. Okay. Boo.com was like the big dog company in the bubble. It was like $250 million raised from Goldman and JP Morgan. I had a parallel business in the United States. They wanted me to buy it. They wanted me to invest. I always said no. $250 million ended up going to me, all the intellectual property assets, for, I believe, $650,000. In fact, I also got a very nice collection of Boo.com notebooks, of which I have all my notes written. You can't even see it. It's these.
Oh, wow.
Exactly the kind of, look at it.
Some history right here.
This is what you buy as a startup. Anyway, the reason I bring this up, Boo.com, they've been trying to get us to invest. They wanted $30 million or something. I said, no. But then one day, the music stopped. They ran out of money, and they went into receivership, the UK version of a bankruptcy. Yeah. I found out a little bit late. I reached out to the solicitor. He said, sorry, we've already got bids in. It's too late. I said, you've got to let me bid. I'm going to be the highest bid. You got to let me in. I bid. I won. I had 48 hours to fly there, get everything I had bought, and leave because the offices were being shut down and they were being cleaned out. So I just, 2 things. One, I spent 2 all-nighters in a row drinking Red Bull. First time I'd ever had Red Bull. This was 2003. I don't even think it made it to the US yet. But before I ever got to the process of going, I am not a checklist, anal retentive guy. If you were to look around this, you'd see a lot of piles. I am a pile guy. I know which piles have my stuff in them. It's just not how I'm just not that super checkity check. But I knew I had 48 hours to take down an entire company's asset base, and I had to be that guy. So every day when I woke up extra early, whatever time it was, I think it was 5 a.m. back then, I said to myself, wow, you are an incredibly anal retentive, organized guy that can't survive without a checklist, aren't you? And I would make my checklist of all the things I had to do, and I would go back to it, and I acted like that person that I was not. Now, in fairness, I only had to act like that person for the 48 hours I had, but it was required. There was no other way around it. I had to be ultra organized and disciplined, and so I assumed that trait of myself and just acted as if I had it. So, you know, the other thing you can do, like I'm a big fan of making everything you can harder on yourself physically, like take the stairs, not the elevator, sprint, don't run, whatever you can do, make it a little harder. It's going to be better for you over time. But you can train yourself to look for opportunities like that to try a little bit harder in business too. You go to a trade show and it ends at 6. Maybe you're the one that says to yourself, you know what? A lot of people are still in their booths that I could talk to. Maybe I should spend the next half an hour. And at the end of the half an hour, there's still people in those booths. Maybe it's another half an hour. You're urged to go home and relax because you're burned out from being on that floor all day. Don't do it. Don't let yourself weaken. Ask yourself, how can I do more? There were 2 sayings we used to have when I was an entrepreneur back in the day. Company ended up taking public, so it did work out. One was, I'll sleep when I'm dead, because that's how little sleep we got. Now, in reality, we did what I called, or somebody called, sleep cameling. You work all week long, and on Saturday, you don't wake up till 2. But then you're going to be working part of the weekends anyway. The other saying I loved was Monday to Friday, that's for keeping up with the competition. Holidays and weekends, that's for pulling ahead. So you have to set your mindset to, how do I find an opportunity to do even more? How do I make it even harder for me, but better for the business, or better for me personally? Like the way they train Navy SEALs, you've got to go through an absolute hellish situation because they know one day you'll need to know that's possible. Business is war in its own way. You've got to constantly be fighting.
The example you shared there as a founder, as an entrepreneur, was fashionmall.com. And
Yep.
This is a business which you built up from nothing to a successful IPO, which very few people can say. And I love it when I speak to VCs that have done that, because the vast majority of them, no disrespect to them, they've never started a company. So oftentimes the advice that they're giving, it's probably quite valuable, but it's not always lived in reality, which is a very different thing from actually doing it rather than just saying it. What's the biggest lessons that you learned, Ben, from taking the company public?
Well, first, it's interesting. When I moved here, I didn't know venture. And I did not believe it would be possible for anybody to be an effective venture capitalist without having previously been a founder. I've come to realize that's an unfair thing. There are phenomenal VCs that were never founders. They were operators, they worked in business, but they were never founders themselves. The number of people that actually have taken it all the way to IPO is incredibly tiny. Like, I have a lot of respect for people like Reid Hoffman, right? He's excellent at what he does. He was an excellent entrepreneur. He was an excellent seed investor. He's been an excellent partner for Greylock. And he's doing many other things. And there are a few more, but wow, the number of folks you see that were actually entrepreneurs is quite slim. So I think the number one thing it's a little different than the question exactly the way you asked it, but I think my 25 years as an entrepreneur is what allows me to pick founders that have what it takes better than most. And I say better than most because if you look by cohort, in the 18 years I've been doing this, the percentage of the companies I've backed that have gone on to raise a round after me, meaning I seeded them and they raised a Series A, usually from a tier 1 firm, usually from my introductions, that's one of my primary goals in life, ranges from about 63% to 74% per batch. And I've never met anybody that's even broken 50. And I was at a major fund where we would convert 10% of the seeds we invested into Series A's. So that indicates that apparently the entrepreneurs I pick are entrepreneurs other people get excited about as well. I mainly just learned how flippin' hard it is. I mean, every entrepreneur with an enormous success has stared into the valley of death and dodged a bullet by a tiny hair. NVIDIA, most valuable company in the world at $4 trillion. The story I've heard is that at one point they were about to run out of money. They were not going to make payroll, and he had to go to his customers that had ordered things and say, if you don't prepay this product, it will never be delivered. And he got that money. If he didn't get that money, that company doesn't exist. We all have those moments. And that's why I'm so obsessive about the tenacity and grit and drive of these entrepreneurs, because you will face near-death experiences as an entrepreneur. The question is, will you let them kill you? Because a lot of it is whether or not you're willing to just fight through it. I'm not religious, but there's very much that, as I walk through the valley of death, you have to have a belief that is almost beyond you and your business, or an absolute faith in yourself and that business to keep marching into what appears to so many others to be certain death and destruction and bankruptcy for what you are doing. Because that is the only way you will get to the other side. I often have to help founders in very difficult times. And one of the things I often will say, I think always is, look, this is a very, very hard time. I get that. I have lived through it. I have suffered this before. You will suffer it. Many entrepreneurs will suffer it. Nothing I'm going to say is going to make it better. But you should know it is always darkest before it gets even darker. And only then, if you push through, do you sometimes find the light. Just assume it's always going to get worse. And then you might make it. It's tough because, entrepreneurship destroys families and marriages and maybe the mental health of some of its people. I actually think that probably is unlikely. The people that gravitate towards entrepreneurship thrive on it. If you didn't, you wouldn't have been an entrepreneur. If you're not going to thrive on it, you should not take a job at a startup. If you want work-life balance, you definitely should not work at a startup. If you spend a lot of time obsessing about your mental health, I'm going to go with maybe startups aren't the place for you. I mean, we all need peace in our lives. I'm not, an overbearing evil zealot. I know how hard I'm willing to work, but I find places for peace. They're just not very long. I can't meditate. I can't do yoga. But if I'm driving from here down the coast, I will pull over, walk onto the beach, take off my shoes, walk into the ocean, spend a couple of minutes feeling the water and watching the waves. That gives me peace. I will find a time to read. It's rare, but it happens. I'll think while I drive. I'll listen to comedy in the Tesla. Find little pieces of peace. Walk in the woods. They now have a saying for that, right? It's like, I think they call it forest bathing or nature bathing in Japan.
Yeah.
I go to New York. I work ridiculous hours, but I try to see one Broadway show or hear a piece of music. This time, all my meetings went so late, I missed out on the gospel session that I wanted to hear. Oh, well, I did take a kayak off the tip of Manhattan and paddle around. That was sort of neat. So look, you take an hour out of a 14-hour day. Might be a little more than you do, but it was a weekend. I was working anyway. On the weekend, I got to squeeze a little time in. So it's just a very, very, very long journey with no guarantees at the end. People see the successes. They don't hear the stories of the ones that didn't make it. And that makes it, it's people solve for success. It's a classic cognitive bias. And so they see the ones that succeeded. They think they're as smart or smarter than those people. They think their ideas are as good or better than those people's ideas. And they don't see that the people they're seeing are 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. So many dead bodies, metaphorically, in the world of entrepreneurship. It is just hard. And for most people that haven't done it before, all of that's a surprise. My point being, what I learned is, it's just pain. Entrepreneurship and pain are the same thing. Again, I steal a quote from my CrossFit instructor. It does not get easier. You just get better and you can do more.
And you're right to be honest with people and tell them how difficult this is before they're getting into it. Because you're right that all they see is the movie, The Social Network, and they think they're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, and that's the mindset that a lot of people have. And then they get in this and they get punched in the face, and then they realize, holy shit.
It's one of the great quotes. That's a Mike Tyson quote, right? I remember the guy that started TPG and I were having lunch with a winery he bought, and he was using this quote. He said, it's like Mike Tyson says about your plan. Everybody has a plan when they get in the ring with me until I punch them in the face.
Yes.
And it is so true of entrepreneurship. Every day someone's punching you in the face, metaphorically. And woof, But it's also a wonderful journey. Even what's fascinating, I think people overestimate the downside and underestimate the upside, even when it doesn't work. I have had more than one entrepreneur that's put in 10 years or more, come out the other side with a zero financially, with a non-exit. And they still wouldn't trade it for anything, because the formative years of their life, the learnings, they came into the company they went into with the acqui-hire so much higher up on the ladder. I mean, it is, when you're young, an incredible knowledge creation journey. You know, it's like people often, particularly when they're young, I don't know if you ever play D&D, but in D&D, you've got the characters all have strength, charisma, wisdom, intelligence, and dexterity. People underestimate the difference between wisdom and intelligence. You're born with intelligence, right? You were either born smart or dumb or somewhere in between. That ain't changing. There's some theories now that it can, but you can learn more. But your intelligence is, you know, I can handle this much. Wisdom, you earn every single day. One of my favorite quotes is that it's about experience. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. You know, it just, you make mistakes and you learn and you grow stronger. And as long as you survive, that can work out.
Thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you click the follow or subscribe button wherever you're watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Introducing Lisa, the world's first AI-powered recruiter. She's an AI agent who works 24/7, screening candidates on autopilot, conducting interviews in 30 different languages, uploading all the best candidates to your applicant tracking system. Hire 10 times faster at 90% lower cost and significantly improve the candidate experience. Visit welovealpha.com to start your free trial now.